This is a bonus outtake from our interview with Cheap Trick's Bun E. You can hear his entire full-length episode, and you can browse our growing archives of past episodes for free by subscribing to the Trap Set on iTunes or your favorite podcast app.
And it also seems like you guys were coming into contact with other bands that were getting record deals, and it might have seemed more like a possibility at that point for you.
Well, we were
Rick
all...
had already had a deal.
Yeah, and we were friendly, like gregarious type of guys. Like we'd go to meet somebody and, hey, what label are you on? What are you doing? And we'd be, oh, that's great, and we love it. And we wanted to hear all about it and wanted to hear what was happening.
What was the dynamic like within the band? Did it feel like everybody was fulfilling a different role? Like,
well, Rick was a songwriter. He wrote the songs, and he was the de facto leader. Probably. He did all the announcing on stage.
Were you the youngest one in the band?
No, Robin was the youngest. He was class of 71.
Okay.
He went to a different high school. When Sick Man of Europe moved back to Rockford with Stookie and Mooney, because our manager was in Madison, Ken, and he said, you got to move back here, I can get you a bunch of work. And about a week after we moved back, Rick and Ken and Tom got together one night and probably had a few beverages and decided Stookie wasn't a good enough singer. And they fired Stookie. And they called me up and went, hey, we fired Stookie. And I was like, oh, good. Now what are we going to do? We got gigs in like 3 weeks. And the next day, Tom went, I can't stand it here. I'm moving back to Philly with Stookie. So there's me and Rick suddenly sitting there. And Rick goes, you know any singers? I was like, yeah, I know a couple of really good singers live across town. And Rick's like, I know some bass players, So we got a bass player. And I called Robin. And he was working at a bar in the Dells, singing, Wisconsin Dells. And he'd signed a 5-year contract to do this every summer.
A 5-year contract?
When he was 16, and he had 2 summers to go. So Robin was like...
that couldn't be legal if he signed it when he was 16.
The guy that owned the bar was the lieutenant governor of the state of Wisconsin. And Robin went, I can't do anything for the next 2 summers. I got this gig I'm doing. So I knew this other guy, Zeno. So we called Zeno, and he joined, and the bass player Rick knew joined, and his wife made him quit after a week, and boy did he regret that later. But then we got another guy that we knew, and that was Cheap Trick. Then, well, for the first month it wasn't Cheap Trick because we didn't have a name. Then we got the name Cheap Trick.
How did the name come about?
We just made it up in the garage. It was, we were kind of we didn't
It's a
have
lot more catchy of a name than
we didn't have lasers, and we didn't have bombs, and we didn't have capes and things like all the bands, the big bands of that year did. So we decided we'll kind of be the anti that. So we just called it Cheap Trick. It was something I remember it was like, well, we could call it this or that. How about Cheap Thrills? And Rick was like, how about Cheap Trick? And I was like, yeah, that's good.
So then Zeno was in the band for a couple of years.
He was in the band for about 15 months.
Okay.
Tom joined the band after 6 months. He joined the band at the end of '73. And we did some gigs. We were doing like 4 sets a night. And he was like, I can't stand this singer. The guy sings through all the solos. I can't stand this guy. Tom didn't like him. We were like, okay, well, we'll tell him to quit singing through all the solos and stuff. Well, that didn't work and stuff. And
he kept singing through the solos?
Yeah, Zeno was like a Steve Marriott, and he was just up there just wailing away all night long. And one night we were playing the Depot in Minneapolis, which is now First Avenue. And this guy came up and he's like, hey, I'm the drummer. I used to be the drummer from the Litter. And hey, how you doing? And he goes, hey, we got this band up here, and you guys don't look like you really get along with your singer on stage. And we were like, well, he's a singer, And he goes, we'd love to hire your singer. And we said, we'll talk to him. We'll have him call you. And so we talked to Zeno and said, look, this guy...
It's kind of like asking someone's father for permission to ask out the daughter or something.
It was a lot like that. It was like,
very classy of
it was musicians treating singers like pieces of property, kind of. We'll trade you this guy for that guy. So yeah, they hired Zeno. We said, yeah, we don't know Zeno. We're not. This band's really not happening too much. And so Zeno took a gig with those guys for $150 a week.
Now the Budokan album that you made there is your highest selling record of all time, correct?
Yeah.
And what happened is the energy from Japan actually did kind of transfer back over to the U.S. or the Western world.
Kinda. Yeah.
Okay, so what do you mean by kinda?
Well, we were at Budokan in April and May of '78, and See, the Japanese Sony bought, it was Epic Sony, it was CBS Japan. They were splitting into Epic Sony and Columbia Sony into two companies. So to commemorate that, the two labels, they decided they were going to do a Budokan series. So, Chipa Tarika, you will be our first Epic Sony live album, and Bob Dylan will be Columbia Sony live album. Okay, great. You know, it was going to be a double. We didn't have time to mix a double. We showed up, we got the tapes, and we played them for Werman, and he went, these tapes are terrible. Just go to the Capitol like Kiss did and just recut them all, you know. And we were like, no, we don't want to do that. So
Did you recut any of it?
Well, what we did was they sent the four of us into the record plant in New York. So I was like, I'm the drummer. You never replace the drums, so I'll be the producer. So we sat down and did an evening of patch up on it. So we replaced the bass on everything because the bass was all screwed up. The DI was half unplugged. The mics were aiming the wrong way from the first night, so the Japanese engineers every night set the mics up aiming the wrong way and stuff. That's, you know, they were really good at their job. They did everything exactly the same each night. And we replaced some background vocals, and we replaced some of Rick's guitar, because sometimes he'd be like this instead of like this. He'd be on his little steps, you know, making poses or something, or running around. So we patched it up, and me and Rick started mixing it on days off. We'd like fly into New York on a day off and work on a track, and suddenly the album's due next week. We only got 5 tracks done. Jack, help us. So Jack came in and mixed the other 5 tracks, and we just told Sony, we said, look, we only got time, we're giving you a 10-track album. So I sequenced the album, did all the vocal edits, did all the overdub production, then me and Rick started mixing it. And then Jack came in and finished it, and of course he got all the credit, but he deserves it because he made the bass drum. The bass drum sounded like a tin can. He like re-EQ'd this and did this and flanged this and compressed this, and suddenly it sounded like a bass drum. And you know, he made it kind of palatable for pretty good and stuff, and you know, it kind of went like that, you know.
And then your career did step up a bit in the U.S.
Well, in the fall, we finished mixing this, we sent it to Sony. They send us back, okay, here's copies to listen to. Okay, we put it on, and it's like, it's EQ'd all wrong. It's all MIDI. It sounds terrible. And they're like, it's in production. And we said, you cannot ship any of these. These are starting to come into America. They're getting imported in. Mm-hmm. You cannot ship any of these to America. They don't sound any good. They went, okay, we'll print a new batch. I think they ended up sending all the crummy ones to America. We had the biggest selling import in record history, biggest selling Japanese import. So
which was about 30,000 or something.
It was, and they had orders, and they were selling for like $28 a shot and stuff, which is ridiculous because the albums were like $5 or $6, you know. And people are buying them and going, "I got this," and we're like,
do you think the fact that it was like somewhat scarce and that people had to work extra hard kind of generated some buzz?
It got a mojo. It got a mojo about it for being this rare Japanese import, and our fan, and you had to go through some hoops to get it and stuff, and then Sony was like, look, we're gonna make a 7-song sampler disc, and we'll give this to radio, and we were in finishing up Dream Police, and we said, okay, here's what we'll do. Come '79. We're going to Europe for a month, and then we're going to Japan for like 3 weeks. We're playing everywhere, and they were like, "Yeah, we'll put out this. The sampler's getting played like crazy. This thing's getting imported like crazy." And we looked at the contracts and went, "Well, we're getting paid half of what we get paid on a U.S. record for an import." So it's like we're getting screwed here, you know. And Sony, they love it. They don't care because they're making all the money on it,
right?
You know? And so they went, okay, they were like, you guys go to Europe, you guys go to Japan, we'll put this Budokan thing, we'll put this live album out, it'll sell 200,000 or 300,000 copies, and then when you guys come back, we'll put Dream Police out, and man, get ready for the ride, and all this kind of shit, you know. So we come back from the second Japan.
Were you skeptical?
Well, we figured.
Or did you believe him?
Well, no, we thought, well, the album's old, you know, the live album, that's okay. We're kind of beat on it, we sound kind of tired. It's not the best recording ever we've heard. You know, it's okay. Here's what they wanted. They wanted 3 new songs, so we did "Ain't That a Shame" and "Look Out" and "Need Your Love" on that tour, and because we weren't doing those live, and we did the rest of the live show, and you know, they gave me the tapes of 3 shows and went, pick the song. So I sat down and listened to them all and wrote notes and picked them. I sequenced them. I did all this kind of junk because we were in the middle of a tour, and stuff. So it was all a big homemade project. But they sent us 2 covers, and Tom and Robin are like, this cover looks terrible. We look like sheep on this thing. We look like we're 4 feet tall. And of course, don't worry about it. No one's ever going to see it. So we took cover A and B and kind of put them together and made this cover, front and back and fold out. And this little book they wanted inside, we said, don't change anything from the Japanese one. We don't want to make the Japanese copies more valuable than the U.S. ones and all this kind of stuff. So we changed one word so we'd know the difference. And so when we got back from the Europe and Asian tour, we did a few shows opening for somebody, and Sony calls up and goes, Rolling Stone wants to put you on the cover. We're flying. Annie Leibovitz will be at the show tonight. So after the show till like 2 in the morning, we went to some place and did a photo shoot. And she didn't know what to do. We're like jumping up and down and doing stupid stuff. But then at 6 in the morning, the Learjet flies us to New York and takes us to the executive dining room at Black Rock. And we come walking in and they're like, okay, you guys, I want you to want me. He's going up the charts. Budokan. This thing's just it's going all the way. Get ready for the ride. We're giving you each a gift, and they gave us each a check for like 10 grand. And went, this is a gift. It's not against royalties. Put it in your pocket and get ready. And we were like,
it's
okay.
From the royalty, or it's from something else that they stole from you earlier, probably.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. They were making pretty good money on us from the get-go for sure. We just weren't recouped. But that's the record biz. So that's kind of where it all took off, was right there.